Hi, everybody. Sorry for the little bit of a late start, rushing home from the barn here. So thanks for joining Lynn and I in another monthly live chat. And I'm really excited about this one because we're going to cover what I think it's a super important topic. But to be honest, sometimes people look at me like I have two heads. They'll say, what does investigative behavior or stimulating curiosity, whatever you choose to call it in your own vernacular, what does that have to do with fitness? And in my world, it has so much to do with fitness. So what we're going to do here today is I would like to introduce the topic and why it's important to me and where I encounter sometimes a lack of understanding about how cultivating investigative behavior can improve horses' fitness and why. And then I'm going to hand things over to Lynn, and she can, take the ball and run with it. So thanks, Lynn, for being willing to talk on the fly, because Lynn doesn't really know what I'm going to introduce here. So, hey,
No, I'm going to be surprised.
Lynn. Well, hopefully not too surprised. So, as I already said, I get asked frequently because a lot of people will contact me for a conditioning plan for their horse. They might be trying to improve performance. They might be trying to get over a problem, whether it's kissing spines or like a chronic stiffness cycle, or the horse has a weird hitch and it's get along, whatever. And I'll write up a plan. And it's really important for me to have a sense of the horse's background because that factors so prominently in the plan and the activities that are going to be beneficial, which I'll flesh out more in a little bit. But to kick us off, I wanted to share two quotes from somebody who his works are seminal to me, Dr. Udo Berger. Maybe some of you have read his books. He was a veterinary surgeon. His books are quite old at this point. They were published in the 1930s, but a lot of his work on the physiology and anatomy is still so relevant. And shockingly, we're still not putting it into play in many cases. So this is from the book. It's called "The Rider Forms the Horse," and it's on the function and development of the muscles in a riding horse. And a lot of this is quite granular, but there is a lot of wonderful general information. And this quote I thought was so relevant for our conversation today. He's writing about arena riders and how, we all have a bit of a tendency to micromanage our horse. And he said, they, being arena riders, do not want to allow the horse to take attentive notice of its surroundings. They never leave the horse to itself in the way that nature intended. Only what is natural can be sensible and correct, and only the horse which senses its surroundings consciously and understandingly, and which training is based on an unforced natural way of moving and carrying itself, can produce optimum performance. So I think especially the bit about the horse being invited to be aware of its surroundings is a big takeaway there. And remember, he's writing about the function and the development of muscles specifically. And then the last thing I'll share is just a brilliant one-liner where he says, and remember, he's a veterinary surgeon, so he had to deal with quite a lot of muscular dysfunction. He writes, muscular suppleness can only follow if the horse approaches everything with an open mind. So despite what trainers and blogs might say about, well, this exercise loosens your horse or creates flexibility, blah, 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 we do need to ask ourselves what state the horse is in with its mental approach, for lack of a better explanation. So Lynn, do you want to start the first slide share? I just have 4 slides I'll go
Sure.
through to flesh this out a bit more for you all, and then we will then I'll hand the microphone over to Lynn, who will take it from there. So to build on the words of Dr. Udo Berger, that suppleness, looseness, flexibility, the ability to use muscles comes from a horse who's in a certain mental state. And for me, that's, if you think about working with horses, at least the ones I encounter, they usually fall somewhere on the spectrum between being pretty anxious and agitated, which would leave their bodies in a state of the muscles anyway, in a state of, being flooded with stress hormones, and very acidic and inflamed to some degree. And you cannot strengthen a tissue that's in that state. The other end of the spectrum would be the horses that Lynn and I have chatted about before that are pretty bored, or you might say shut down, or just kind of shuffling through the motions. And the thing about these horses is they might be really obedient, quote unquote, but the nervous system is not what I say that it's not fully participating, right? If a horse is only showing up for its task like 25% of the way in terms of its effort and attention level, you can guarantee that the synapses, the motor neurons, the sensory nerves that have a feedback and feed forward loop with the central nervous system, all the signals are a bit diminished. And so we have to find activities to get the horse more fully involved. Otherwise, you are never going to create stronger muscles. So this isn't just an example of a young horse that I worked with a few years ago. He'd been broke to saddle for enough months to, not buck anybody off and kind of sort of steer, but other than that, didn't know much. And this is how he learned to travel around. And as many of you know, a young horse in particular, but really any horse that's out of shape, that doesn't have any fitness, will carry his head pretty high. And they do that as a way of finding stability. They do that to stabilize their spine so that they bring the vertebral joints closer together. And there is a sense of being stable in movement until the muscles and ligaments are developed to stabilize the spine in a lower head position. This often feels safer to them, especially if they're carrying a rider. So many people would say, rightfully, this horse needs to become stronger because, as you can see, he doesn't really have much muscle tone. He's pretty unmuscled. And the temptation would be to put side reins on the horse. We see this constantly, or really focus on getting the horse's head down, right? Like, let's get him in a posture where his body's going to become stronger. Now, the way, and any of you know me know I hate side reins because, forcing a muscle into a position never makes it stronger. I mean, you can try that yourself if you're a doubter of this. You can put yourself in whatever contorted pose you want to become stronger in and hold yourself there. Your muscles are not going to get stronger. They might become more rigid, but rigidity is not the same as a functional strong muscle. So I'm going to tie back into what I mentioned earlier. What I like to do is get as much of a background from the horse as I can, because horses, like us, they create motor patterns. We call it muscle memory, but really the memory is not in the muscle. It's in their brain, it's in their central nervous system. And so if a horse has spent enough time doing tasks, they become patterned about it. So in this horse's case, to him, kind of being on a lunge line meant traveling in this fashion. And you'll also notice he has kind of a quiet eye. He was not a real mentally alert, hey, I'm here, what are we doing today kind of horse. He was definitely withdrawn. Definitely, we might call him quiet, but really, I think he was sort of pulled inside himself a bit. So the way I approach it with this horse is to choose activities that I know that they haven't done a lot of. In this horse's case, that was, slow jaunts up and down our hillside to build up his body. Some work with poles, some work with other horses, because he had mostly just been worked by himself in an indoor arena. So things that were outside of what he had already done for the purpose of novelty, to get him to mentally show up a bit more, but also that allows me to put new motor patterns into the horse. This is what I believe, because we need to not just keep hitting that same groove that's already grooved down, right? So we'll go to the next slide now, please, Lynn. And this is the horse about a month later, maybe 6 weeks later. So you can see, a difference in his top line considerably, a little bit difference in his neck muscling. He's starting to have a little bit of a top line. Most importantly, though, a longer step from the hind leg. The previous slide had him just paddling his feet under his pelvis. So here he's starting to stride forward with the hind leg. And so, in my world, there we go. Thank you. Wonderful. So this in my world is, a success story. The horse is heading in the right direction. We've added strength, but not by just doing more of what he was used to doing, right? So this is why it is so important in my world for the horse to cross train. They must do activities outside. If you think of yourself, if you have a sport that you like to do, a lot of times the way you improve your function at that sport, whether you need more ambidexterity or you need more raw strength or you need more speed, you usually will incorporate activities outside of that sport to promote improvement within that sport. The same thing applies to horses for the reasons that we've sort of run through quickly here. Now, the problem is, as I alluded to in the beginning, many of us might be on a horse for whom cross training becomes very challenging because they haven't maybe promoted investigative behavior. So maybe riding outside of the arena, while it seems like I'm telling you that would be a good idea, maybe that seems terrifying for you and the horse. It's not productive. Or maybe you try to go over a row of cavaletti at a simple little trot and the horse approaches it and then just launches itself. I've seen this happen. The poor rider's not ready and the horse just gets up to that pole and then just shoots up in the air 4 or 5 feet. He startles himself. He's not used to it. And that doesn't promote the rider's feeling of wanting to do that again and again, right? So this is an important piece. How do we cultivate investigative behavior? And we want to do that so that we are enabled to cross train. And so we'll go to the next slide. So this little mare is demonstrating this beautifully, and we'll start to segue into where I'm going to hand the metaphorical reins over to Lynn. But, I spent a lot of time telling arena riders what we all should do better to make our horses complete athletes. But I know a lot of you are trail riders, endurance riders, pleasure riders. And this little mare is an endurance horse. I work with a lot of endurance riders out here in California. And while they have incredible stamina and cardio fitness, many of the riders are discovering that if they can improve the horse's strength and balance, the horse will carry its center of gravity more efficiently over long distances longer than, say, 30 miles, and the horse will stay sounder, the back won't get sore, all these great things. But again, you run into challenges, and this mare is always a good sort of litmus test when she is in a period of only trail riding. When you bring her into an arena, even though we arena riders see that as a really safe, groovy, boring place to be, this little horse gets pretty rattled until we, take our time and help her settle in, and then everything is smooth and easy peasy. But I put this picture in because this was one of those phases where she's quite fit. You can't say this horse lacks fitness. She does lack the strength to carry herself off the forehand. She's kind of heavy on the front end, and she's not a spring chicken anymore. So her owner, does want to help her move with a lighter gait in front. And again, her version of cross training would be getting in the arena, right? Not vice versa. And sometimes this is what we encounter. Now, how do we facilitate investigative behavior? Well, I'm hoping Lynn can help us flesh that out a bit more. But let's move forward to my last slide, and I'll finish with this. So this is also an endurance horse. And this little guy has done Tevis Cup at least once, maybe twice. So those of you that know that, it's a very, very famous 100-mile race out here across the Sierras in a single day. And he did marvelously. But when his rider here first got him, he would frequently get, puffy legs at about the halfway mark of these 100-mile races because he is built a little downhill and he was heavy on the front end. So she started coming for dressage lessons. Now, he was a bit dull, like the gray horse in my first slide when we first came. He just hadn't done this stuff before in the arena, and he was kind of shuffling through the patterns because he's, quiet by nature for the most part. And as you can see in this photo, we played around with different ground poles, different, setting up the exercises for different durations to try to capture his attention. We were consistent. She was very, very consistent with her lessons, and that helped. And as you can see in this photo, he is very eager, and I like his expression. He's alert, he's focused, he's cantering over a little, I always call it a bounce, but that's the wrong word, a little in and out with the ground pulls. And I know some of my arena riders who can't yet do that exercise. So for this little endurance horse, this 100-mile endurance racer horse, to come in and find that level of balance and suppleness is really cool. And his rider did a fantastic job. But again, it came from acknowledging that he is exposed to a lot on the trail. To some degree, you might say, well, his investigative behavior, we must have already checked that box. But when we brought him in the arena, there wasn't a lot of engagement. It's like the lights weren't switched on. So the exercises we needed to use to improve his muscle and function, they weren't going to be successful if we didn't go about ensuring that we were catching his mental participation, that open mind that Dr. Udo Berger quote referenced. So I think I'll hand the reins over to Lynn. I'm talking fast because I don't want to use up all your time. So I had asked Lynn to help us with this because we've spent a lot of time in the past talks about arena horses, and I thought it would be fun to flip the coin a little bit and talk about some of these horses that maybe have more experience outside the arena. And can we just sort of assume that the investigative behavior is on board or not? Or how do we handle this? How do we approach this?
I think we think about investigative behavior as something that trail horses are often encouraged to do, but most horses were trained in an arena. And so they tend to have a preconceived idea about how much fun it's going to be in an arena and what they're supposed to do. And really, trail and arena can be very different environments. The horses and riders can be making very different assumptions and have different expectations. And so the transition can be a little more stressful for a horse than we'd think that it might be. Trail and endurance horses are used to working on a loose rein, and they're surrounded by natural elements. So they're accustomed to all this. They're being aware of what's going on around them as part of their job. A trail horse is going to know that barred owl is going to sit tight and not do anything while we go by. And they're also likely to know that deer is going to stare and stare and stare. And when she's ready to move, she's going to move with a leap and a bound that would really shock a horse if he wasn't already aware that the deer was there. So these are the kinds of things that they're responsible for paying attention to. They've also got a lot of variety. There's purpose in that they see, a purpose that they see in their riding, and latitude to make decisions. Here I've dropped my reins and picked up my camera. I know that Bronze knows that I'm not going to fit under the middle of that sapling, and he's going to move to the left and give me room. He makes that decision on his own, as many trail horses make a lot of decisions through the environment. So we get him into new surroundings. We have different equipment. And for horses who are really new to rings, especially if there's busy stuff going on, there can be equipment that can be concerning, especially equipment that might move by itself, like a ball that could roll with the wind or flags that flap. But even more so, indoor arenas can be particularly intimidating. They have they've got the roof over it, and there's going to be strange noises, activities, different shadows, probably funny smells, doors open and close, or maybe mirrors. And meanwhile, what we're really asking most often is for the horse to focus more on the rider, often with more repetition and less clear purpose, while the riders often are expecting more precise control and might themselves be tense and nervous. So all of this can put a horse in a negative state. It's all new, and it's like, uh-oh, what's really going on here? This is a core effect space diagram that represents a horse's emotional state. From the bottom to the top, we have the very low intensity of emotion, where if you're not watching carefully, you don't see any emotion. You just think that horse is quiet and obedient. And the top, of course, is where they're off the charts, and and we know there's something really wrong. And left to right shows the emotions from less pleasant to more pleasant. So we have the potential, bringing a horse into the ring, of having some confusion and frustration, potentially even some anxiety. And if people don't handle that in an appropriate way, we can even end up with resentment and getting into a fight. So we've got this strange environment, new expectations, lack of control, and with these negative emotions, learning and fitness aren't going to be happening over here. Where we really want the horse to be is on the right side of the core effect space, where we have positive emotions, and the most effective positive emotion is seeking or curiosity, and that's where investigative behavior comes in. But any place we can add in play and factor in the bond or the connection between horse and the handler or rider, that's also a positive. And all of these positives are intrinsically rewarding, and that's where we promote the learning, because the horse is in a mental state to learn and focus, and his body then can be in a state to be receptive. Investigative behavior promotes these positive emotions in multiple ways. Seeking is inherently rewarding because we've got dopamine going with it. Exploring the environment reassures the horse that he's safe. So this is all part of your first quote about the horse being very aware of his surroundings. And we're encouraging him to do that. So allowing him to explore gives choices and control, which makes him feel safer. And exploring with his handler or rider is a shared positive experience. So now we have the emotions that will help the horse associate ring time with positive things. To start with, we want the horse to be familiar with the whole environment. One option is to turn the horse loose to explore. That's not always safe or appropriate. And sometimes a horse doesn't even know he's allowed to explore, so he may not do anything. Unlike little Opie here, who decided that he would go poke his nose into everything that he could find in the arena. So the minimum is to walk the horse around in each direction, lead her around so that she gets to see everything from both sides, because objects may look different from two different sides, and the background will be different. So it's not true that horses can't recognize an object with the other eye. It's simply a matter of it's going to look different from the other side. And while you're doing that, invite the horse to inspect anything that might be interesting. Doesn't even have to be something the horse looks at as fearful, but just something she's interested in. Shiloh's probably seen these barrels more times than we can count in the 15 years they've been in my arena, but every now and then she likes to go check them out. And I've noticed that a lot of people don't do this. I took Bronze to a clinic one time that was in a coverall arena, and he'd never been in such a thing either had I, and it was raining and blowing. And so I took advantage of the lunch break when nobody else was in the arena to take Bronze in and walk him around and show him everything that was in there and let him notice the sounds of it. And the clinician came in and asked what I was doing. And I said, well, I'm showing Bronze the arena, so we won't have any surprises or interruptions during my lesson. And he looked surprised. And he said, oh, that's a good idea. And it made me think, apparently he does not see people routinely do this. But to me, this is a very minimum as a courtesy to a horse, so that he can be aware of the surroundings without needing to focus. Because if, for instance, you're in an indoor arena and somebody comes and opens the door to bring another horse in, if that horse hasn't been introduced to the door or seen the door open, then naturally he's going to need to go check it out. If he's already checked it out, then an ear and eye might go over there. Oh, that's the door. I already saw that. So that's that of being aware of the surroundings. And you want to demonstrate things that could be a problem. I didn't have an indoor arena, unfortunately, to take pictures of, but Shiloh's just checking out the flag there. But in an indoor arena, there's generally a lot more things we need to show them. Anything that might be unusual, like the doors, or say an automatic mounting platform. I could picture a horse being a little bit alarmed at the thing moving by itself, because horses are very aware of what things should or shouldn't do on their own. And if investigative behavior turns into play, laugh and make the most of it. This is Jet, who picked up this is a traffic cone, one of those heavy traffic cones. He didn't just pick it up, he tossed it. He threw it about 10 feet away. So what we've done now is we've faded out those potential negative emotions, and we're in that positive emotion seeking, possibly play, and the bond between the horse and handler or rider that goes along with having positive experiences together. So now we've got a horse who's really in learning mode.
And I think once they get to that phase, Lynn, the trust is there. And so a rider who's suddenly asking more of them, quote unquote, like, I want you to make this circle and I'd like you to go at this rate of speed and I might have a little rein contact. I find that it does not overwhelm the horse. I do find riders sometimes have to get over a mental hurdle because there is an assumption that if you always ride with loose reins and the horse is afforded a lot of freedom on the trail, that it's almost unfair to come in the arena and suddenly ask more nitpicky stuff of them. But the way you just presented it, I find that it usually flows very seamlessly.
Yes, and I think that's because when you have a horse in a positive emotional state, then he's in an optimistic state where he feels like, well, whatever's going to happen, he's going to find it more interesting rather than worrisome. So, okay, my rider has taken up the reins. Well, I guess we're ready to have a new adventure now, or there's something new going to be asked. And when we have them in a positive emotional state, horses are readier for new challenges, ready to step up to the challenge and more confident that they're going to be successful. And some of the ways we can keep them in that state are making sure that if we're doing groundwork with them, try to synchronize with them. Just simple things like walking in step helps keep them engaged. Demonstrate something new if that's appropriate. And use props to show the horse that there's a purpose to the exercise that we're doing. Shiloh's got the poles there to show her that if we want her to back up, we'd like her to back straight. And the cones there represent an exercise that I saw Susan Harris do in a clinic long ago to help a horse pick up the canter on the correct lead, weave through the cones at a trot, the horse is balanced, and then seeing the fence at the end of the arena and coming around that last cone, tracking left, tells the horse left lead is very clearly the correct answer here. Mm-hmm. And I noticed you had zigzag poles for jogging in your corrective exercise.
Yeah.
Exercise number 19. So that's another use of poles. And sometimes I know that sometimes horses need to repeat actions in order to learn or in order to build the muscles and build the memory. But we can keep that from getting boring by making games out of patterns. Another of your corrective exercises was the long and low walk with walk trot transitions. And you had a set number of steps of walk, a set number of steps of trot. And if you count those steps, I've noticed that horses invariably figure out how many steps there's going to be between the transition. They're rebalancing for the transition. We don't need nearly as much cue to tell them, and they're starting to actually carry themselves, which is exactly what we want them to learn to do. Mm-hmm. And you have you've done another one, and I don't remember if it was in your book or if it was one of your videos with canter transitions on a circle. And at a particular place, if you make the transition from trot to canter, canter to trot, then the horse is ready and rebalanced. So we've used that pattern. I find it kind of fun to watch as the horse discovers the pattern. we've done this a couple of times, like, oh, I get the pattern. So this is a level of success for the horse. It's like, oh, I figured this out. So it's almost like a variation on investigative behavior. I figured out what the game is,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm ready, and I'm ready. I'm ahead of you.
Yes, and the horse is not in a cramped, rigid state from the rider, doing too much with their aids. So therefore, blood and oxygen supply to the muscles is better when the horse is making its own small postural adjustments. We don't get that, tension in the nerve endings and that rigidity in the muscles. So Zoom is
Mhm.
telling us we have 10 minutes left, Lynn.
Well, I think what you had to say at the beginning was really brilliant, and I'm really just adding a little bit on here to how do we maintain that. Um, Taking some breaks. Horses need to like everybody, they need a break to process new information. So if you've done a new exercise, and he's done it well, I used to have an instructor who always say, well, now let's do it again and reinforce it. And invariably, Franz's response was, oh, you didn't like the way I did it before. I'll do it differently this time. So sometimes it's much better to reinforce something by letting the horse pause, think about what he's done, bask in his success, and then move on to something else before you come back to it. So these breaks can be really important, and they don't have to be long. It can be 30 seconds or a minute or two. And sometimes the horse likes to take a little break to play. And all the time we're doing this, we need to watch that horses aren't drifting into the negative emotions, because it's easy for us to get really focused on, okay, this is what I want to do, and I want to get my horse in this moving in this way, or I need to think about this, I need to think about how I'm riding, and we might miss a horse's mental shift. So we want to watch that a horse is not drifting into the negative emotional state. And that means watching for calming signals. And Jack, you had the suggestion, it was a year and a half ago, you and I did the program on calming signals.
Mm-hmm.
And these are so important because um, they are meant to relieve tension. So when a horse does a calming signal, it is both saying, I'm trying to calm myself down, and I'm trying to tell you I'm getting a little too tense and stressed, and I need things to calm down, or I need less pressure. And the tricky thing about calming signals is that the same behaviors can mean multiple things. So I would refer people back to, and I'll put the link at the end here, to our program on calming signals, because this is a good way to monitor whether we're keeping the horse in that positive emotional state. But just to give some examples of calming signals, a head shake is one. Here we have my sister and her horse Gracie, and we were doing a photo shoot, and we were asking Gracie to pose, and she was being very, very cooperative. But when she shook her head really hard, we really didn't know, was this a calming signal saying, like, you've asked me to stand too still for too long, or was it flies are bugging me?
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to say. Shiloh, I'm pretty sure, is yawning because I asked her to do the same course multiple times, and she was starting to feel frustrated, like, why am I doing this over and over again when I think I did it right the first time? And this one doesn't have to do with arena, but I thought it was a good example of a calming signal. Bronze is turning his head away, hiding in the corner because the dentist has just arrived.
Mm.
So if we pay attention to these, then we can think about, what do we do when a horse shows that calming signal? And the first thing is, let him complete the action, take a deep breath, and assess the situation. Often, all we need to do is let him express himself, and we can move right on. But we might want to move on a little more slowly or quietly, or we might want to go on to something else. And if the horse really is looking too stressed to continue what we were doing, then we go find something else for him to investigate. If nothing else, put some treats underneath buckets and let him go play and find them. Any sort of thing that you can find to shift his mind back to something that creates the positive emotions there.
That's great. I want to put a pin in the pause and breathe. It's something I was thinking about this morning. I was schooling a horse in my arena, so you're on sand footing. We've been cantering for quite a bit because that's what we're working on, is improving the quality of the canter. And it had been going swimmingly. I took a break, went back to it, and again, this is a lot of effort. So as the rider, my temptation is, I'm really improving this horse's strength and fitness. I mean, we've been cantering quite a bit. We're in this deeper footing, et cetera, et cetera. But I noticed in that second rep, oh, hang on, when's the last time I felt the horse really breathe deeply in its rib cage? Or when was the last time it let a little snort through its nose? Because when you're doing that level of aerobic work, like that should be happening routinely, that the horse is blowing it out. And I realized, oh, nope, he's gone somewhere with his mind. He's holding his breath. So I did stop and pause until I felt the horse start breathing again, because you're not going to make fitness gains. I mean, if you're not getting oxygen to the muscles, they're not getting stronger. You're not delivering blood. You're not delivering nutrition. You're not flushing out the waste. So that breath is so critical.
Oh.
So I guess in closing, being a happy athlete is it's not just a tagline, it's a real thing. I can see some horses come in the arena and see how aware they are of their environment and the relationship they have with their rider, and know how seamlessly the journey will be for that horse's training to, improve his body mechanics, gain strength, gain fitness. Similarly, I can see horses come in the arena and, whether they're wound up and high as a kite and nervous and riddled, or they're just all kind of shuffling and shut down. I know what a journey that's going to be for that horse. And it's not just about finding the right quote unquote exercises. It's about the whole picture, the mind and the body. So those are my closing remarks. Is there anything you want to leave us with, Lynn?
No, I think that's really important, and remembering that horses have different histories of arena experience, and with some it may not be so much what the rider or owner is doing now, but what they're having to deal with from the horse's history, and might need extra time and patience.
Yes, I love that. I mean, I think that's been a theme, is that I just always reiterate, if even an exercise that's useful, I always reference ground poles, but if that exercise has been practiced by rote over and over and over, I will take that exercise out of the horse's program for a while, because of the muscle memory that's associated with it. And when we're building strength, we need new signals most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time. So you can't, even as a good tool, if that tool has already been used too much, you got to put it in the drawer for a while till you bring it back out.
Right.
Oh, so thank you all for listening. We'll post this all. Feel free to drop your questions in the comment below on YouTube, and Lynn and I will try to get to as many as we can. We'll catch you in a future episode. Bye, Lynn.
Bye.